Welcome back to Buddhist Insights Journey. I am truly glad to meet you again in this quiet space of reflection and rest. Tonight we are here not to strive or achieve, but to simply allow peace to settle into our hearts. Let these words be like a gentle stream, guiding you into stillness. Take a slow, deep breath and feel the air filling your lungs. As you exhale, notice your shoulders soften, your hands loosen, and your body melting gently into the surface beneath you. With every breath, a little more weight is released. This evening, we will walk together through timeless Zen stories gathered from the wisdom of masters across the world. Each story is an invitation to let go, like a leaf falling from a branch, or a rope finally released from tired hands. May these stories open a path for you to rest deeply and to enter sleep as naturally as drifting into silence. Story 1. The Overflowing Teacup. In a quiet mountain province of Japan long ago, there lived a Zen master known as Nan-in. His temple rested on the edge of a cedar forest, where the scent of pine resin filled the air, and the wind sang low hymns through the branches. Travelers often came from far away seeking guidance, yet only a few truly listened. Among them was a scholar, a man widely respected for his knowledge of philosophy and literature. His shelves were filled with scrolls, his tongue sharp with arguments, and his pride carried like a hidden crown upon his head. Though he had read countless scriptures, peace still eluded him. Nights passed with restless thoughts, and days felt heavy with unanswered questions. Believing Zen might offer the missing peace, the scholar climbed the steep stone steps toward Nan-in's humble dwelling. With each step, he rehearsed his questions. What is enlightenment? How can one awaken? What is the essence of Zen? The questions rolled endlessly, like pebbles shaken inside a bowl. He was certain he already knew part of the answers, but he longed for the master to confirm them, to stamp approval on the castle of ideas he had carefully built. When he reached the temple, the evening light was soft, and cicadas echoed from the trees. A simple paper lantern flickered at the entrance, and Nan-in, dressed in plain robes the color of earth, welcomed him with a smile. The scholar bowed deeply, expecting a formal lecture, yet the master only motioned toward a small wooden table where a teapot and 2 cups waited. The scholar sat stiffly, back straight, eyes alert, as though he were attending an examination. His mind was already spinning, arranging words, ready to debate. He watched the old master's hands, slow and deliberate, as they lifted the iron kettle from the hearth. Steam rose in delicate spirals, carrying the fragrance of roasted leaves. Nan-in poured the tea. The warm amber liquid flowed gracefully into the porcelain cup before the scholar. The scholar gave a polite nod, but before he could raise the cup to his lips, he realized that Nan-in was still pouring. The liquid reached the rim, shimmered for a breathless moment, and then spilled over. First a single drop slid down the side of the cup, then another, then a steady trickle spread across the table. The scholar blinked, uncertain if he should speak. He cleared his throat softly, but Nan-in's gaze remained serene, his hand steady, as the tea overflowed and pooled onto the wooden surface. "Master," the scholar finally protested, "the cup is full. It cannot hold any more." Only then did Nan-in set down the kettle, his movements unhurried. He looked into the scholar's eyes, the way one might look into a mirror that had fogged with breath. His voice was calm, yet each word struck like a bell in the silence. "Just like this cup," he said, "your mind is already full. Of opinions, of assumptions, of conclusions. How can I show you Zen unless you first empty your cup?" The words sank into the air, simple and unadorned. For a moment, the scholar felt a ripple of embarrassment. He opened his mouth to defend himself, to explain how much he had studied, how sincerely he sought the truth. Yet the silence between them pressed gently, asking him to notice rather than argue. The scholar glanced at the table where the tea continued to spread. The liquid was not angry. It simply followed gravity, slipping quietly off the edge and darkening the grain of the wood. A tiny stream ran down, falling into the dust below, where it disappeared without resistance. He sat still, realizing that all his words, all his clever arguments, were like this overflowing tea, spilling endlessly, soaking the table, vanishing into the ground. And the more he clung to them, the more restless he became. Nanin did not lecture further. He simply placed a cloth upon the table and wiped gently, as if the act of cleaning was itself the lesson. His movements were neither hurried nor careless. They carried the rhythm of one who understood impermanence. The scholar felt his own shoulders drop slightly, his posture soften, as though the cloth had wiped not only the table but also some hidden tension within him. They sat together in silence, the cicadas' chorus filling the evening air. Slowly, the scholar raised the cup to his lips and tasted the tea. Its warmth spread into his chest, and for the first time that day he was not rehearsing arguments, not preparing clever replies. He was simply drinking tea. And in that moment he understood. The way to learn was not to gather more, but to let go. The story of Nanin and the overflowing teacup has traveled across centuries, because its truth is timeless. We often approach life like the scholar, carrying minds already crowded with knowledge, opinions, and fears. Yet wisdom, like tea, can only be received by an empty vessel. To let go is not to lose, but to make space. A teacup is most useful when it is empty, just as the heart is most open when it is free of clinging. The act of releasing creates room for clarity, for silence, and for the subtle taste of life itself. Nanin's words echo softly. Just like this cup, your mind is already full. Unless it is emptied, nothing more can be received. Story 2. The Sound of One Hand. In a quiet Zen monastery surrounded by rolling hills and streams, there lived a young disciple who was eager for enlightenment. The monastery was a place of silence, where the days were marked not by bells or clocks, but by the rising and setting of the sun. The roofs of the wooden halls glistened after morning rain, and the stone pathways curved between moss-covered gardens. Each day began with meditation at dawn, and each evening ended with the sound of wind passing through bamboo groves. The young disciple was bright, earnest, and determined. His teacher, a wise master, had given him a koan, a riddle that cannot be solved by logic, but can awaken the mind when grasped beyond thought. The koan was simple, yet puzzling. What is the sound of one hand clapping? From the moment he heard it, the disciple carried the question like a heavy stone in his mind. He repeated it through the hours of meditation, he whispered it while sweeping the courtyard, and he dreamed of it at night. Yet no answer came. The more he thought, the more confused he became, as if trying to trap the wind inside a box. Still, he could not let go, believing that if he thought harder, the solution would finally reveal itself. The disciple's struggle grew day by day. He imagined many answers. Sometimes he pressed his hands together, then pulled them apart, wondering if the faint movement of air between his palms was the hidden sound. Other times, he tapped one hand against his knee, or waved it quickly through the air, straining his ears for a secret vibration. Each attempt felt clever at first, yet when he carried it to his teacher, the master would only shake his head softly. The disciple grew restless. His heart burned with frustration, his forehead damp with the sweat of endless effort. "Why can I not see it?" he whispered to himself, pacing beneath the lanterns at night. He saw other monks moving calmly, breathing with ease, and he envied them. To him, life had become one long riddle, and peace seemed to slip further away the more he grasped for it. One evening, after another failed attempt to impress the master, the disciple retreated to the garden. The moon hung bright over the pond, silver light scattering across ripples. The disciple clenched his fist and struck the air. "There must be a sound," he cried. His voice startled a bird from the branches, and its wings thudded into the night. At that moment, the master approached quietly, standing beside him. "Why are you so troubled?" the master asked. "Master," the disciple said, his voice thick with despair, "I have tried everything. I move my hand in the air, I strike it against my body, I imagine sounds in my mind. Still, I cannot find the sound of one hand." The master gazed at the pond, calm and unhurried. "You search as if the answer hides in noise," he said. "But Zen is not found in adding more. It is found in less." The disciple frowned. "Less?" The master lifted one hand slowly. The moonlight touched his open palm, pale and serene. He did not move, he did not clap, he simply held the hand there in silence. The sound of crickets filled the garden, the rustle of leaves swayed with the breeze, and somewhere far away a temple bell echoed faintly. "This," the master whispered, "is the sound of one hand." The disciple's breath caught. He listened, not to a noise, but to the space itself, the vastness where all sounds appear and vanish. His racing thoughts stilled. His shoulders loosened. For the first time since receiving the koan, he felt no urgency to answer. Instead, he felt the quiet embrace of the present moment. In that silence, the question dissolved. There was no need to solve it because there was nothing missing. The disciple realized that all along his struggle was not with the koan, but with his clinging to answers. The sound of one hand was not something to be grasped, but something to be let go into. He bowed deeply to his master, his forehead touching the earth. The master simply smiled, then walked back toward the hall, leaving the disciple under the moonlight. The disciple remained there for a long while, listening, not searching, not straining, but resting in the truth that arises when the mind is empty. The koan of one hand teaches that truth is not discovered by cleverness, but by release. When the disciple stopped chasing noise, he heard silence itself, the ground of all being. In Zen, answers are not possessions to hold, but openings that appear when we drop our need to control. As the old saying reminds us, when the mind is silent, reality speaks. To let go of seeking is to awaken to what has always been here. The sound of one hand is not something to capture. It is the vast quiet in which all sounds rise and fall. Story 3. The Stone on the Road. In the countryside of ancient China, a narrow road wound its way between rice fields and small villages. Farmers carried baskets on their shoulders, merchants guided carts pulled by oxen, and children chased each other along the dusty paths. It was a road that connected people to markets, to neighbors, and to temples in the hills. Everyone relied on it, yet the road was not always easy. One morning, after heavy rain had loosened the earth, a large stone had tumbled down from the hillside and landed squarely in the middle of the path. It was heavy, jagged, and immovable at first glance. Travelers arrived one after another, stopping in frustration. Some cursed their bad luck, some complained about the neglect of the local officials, and others turned back, choosing a longer way around. Among those who passed by was a scholar, muttering about how such obstacles symbolized the decline of society. He stood there for a long time, sighing, before walking away in irritation. A group of farmers paused, shook their heads, and talked about how someone ought to fix the problem, but none of them touched the stone. Even the children, usually playful and curious, only threw smaller pebbles at it before running home. The road became quieter, yet the stone remained, unmoved and unmoving, like a test that no one wished to face. Until, one afternoon, a lone monk traveling with a simple staff approached the same road. His robes were dusty from walking, his sandals worn thin, and his expression calm as the clouds drifting across the sky. The monk stopped in front of the stone. He looked at it, then looked around. The path stretched behind him, marked with footprints, and ahead lay the villages waiting to be reached. He tilted his head slightly, as if listening to the silence. Unlike the others, he did not complain, nor did he sigh. He placed his staff on the ground and crouched down. He pressed his palms against the stone. It was rough, cold, and resistant. The monk leaned his shoulder into it and pushed. At first, the stone did not move at all. The monk's breath came slowly, in rhythm with his effort. Push, breathe in. Release, breathe out. His robes darkened with sweat. Minutes passed. The stone shifted only a fraction, scraping the earth with a heavy groan. The monk paused, stood upright, and wiped his forehead. His eyes were not discouraged. Instead, he scanned the roadside and gathered smaller stones, placing them beneath the larger one like wedges. With patience, he adjusted them carefully, creating a slope that would help. Then he pushed again. This time, the stone rolled slightly more. Dust rose into the air, settling on his robe, but he continued. Villagers passing by stopped and watched. Some laughed softly at the futility of his struggle. Others whispered that he was wasting his time. But the monk remained steady. His silence was stronger than their words. Hours passed. The sun shifted across the sky and the shadows lengthened. Slowly, inch by inch, the stone rolled toward the edge of the road. Finally, with one last effort, the monk pushed it off the path, where it settled harmlessly against the hillside. The road was clear again. The monk stood still, breathing deeply. He did not raise his arms in triumph or wait for applause. Instead, he brushed the dust from his robe, lifted his staff, and continued walking. His sandals tapped softly against the newly freed path, carrying him forward as if nothing remarkable had happened. Behind him, the villagers stood in silence. The same farmers who had complained earlier now looked at the open road with surprise. The scholar returned and found the obstacle gone. The children came back to play, their laughter once again filling the air. Some of them asked, "Who moved the stone?" Others shrugged, not knowing the answer. The monk never turned back. For him, the lesson was not in recognition, but in action itself. Where others saw a problem to complain about, he saw an opportunity to serve. Where others wasted energy in words, he invested his strength in silence. And by moving the stone, he cleared the way not only for himself, but for everyone who walked after him. The stone on the road is life's daily obstacle. Many stand before it, grumbling or turning away, yet the stone does not move with words. It yields only to those who act with patience and quiet resolve. Zen reminds us, complaints change nothing. Action transforms everything. To let go of complaint is to free the energy trapped in frustration and direct it toward the simple act of moving forward. Each stone cleared from the path becomes a gift, not just for ourselves, but for all who journey beside us. Take a slow breath here. 3 stories have passed, each showing us how burdens dissolve when touched with awareness. Before we continue, let your shoulders soften, and notice how even listening can be a practice of letting go. Now, let us walk gently into the next tale. Story 4. Let Go of the Rope. In the mountains of northern China, where cliffs rise like walls of stone against the sky, a lone traveler once wandered far from the beaten path. The day had begun bright and promising, but as evening approached, shadows deepened across the ridges. The wind cooled, carrying the scent of pine and the distant cry of wild birds. The traveler was not a monk, nor a scholar, but an ordinary man searching for direction in life. He carried a small pack, worn sandals, and many worries in his heart. For days he had climbed the winding trails, hoping that solitude might quiet the noise within his mind. Yet the mountains, vast and indifferent, offered no easy answers. One evening, as he walked along a narrow ridge, the earth beneath his feet gave way. Loose gravel tumbled, and in panic he grabbed the nearest thing he could, a thick vine that hung from the cliffside. His body swung over the empty air, his feet dangling above the unknown darkness below. The cold stone pressed against his chest, and his hands clutched the vine with desperate strength. He dared not look down, for fear of seeing the abyss. His heart raced, his breath grew shallow, and every muscle trembled from the strain of holding on. In that moment, he believed that letting go meant death. Hours passed, the night deepened, and still he clung to the rope of the vine, as though it were his only lifeline. The traveler's fingers burned from gripping so tightly. His arms shook, and sweat ran down his face despite the cold air of the mountain night. He whispered to himself, "If I let go, I will fall. If I let go, I will die." The words circled endlessly, feeding his terror. Stars appeared overhead, sharp and bright against the black sky. The moon rose slowly, casting silver light upon the cliffside. In the quiet, the traveler heard his own breath echo against the rock, ragged and shallow. Every moment stretched like an eternity. He prayed for rescue, but no one came. He cursed his fate, yet the rope remained unmoved in his hands. As the night grew colder, his strength waned. His grip weakened, and the pain in his shoulders became unbearable. Exhaustion wrapped around him like a heavy cloak. Tears blurred his vision. "I cannot hold on much longer," he whispered. But the thought of releasing his grip filled him with even greater fear. He imagined himself plunging into endless emptiness, vanishing without trace. Hours dragged on. The moon shifted across the sky. At times he drifted between waking and half-sleep, still clutching the vine, still trapped between life and death. His mind wandered to memories of his family, of the work he had left behind, of the regrets he carried. All of them weighed upon him, heavy as the stone walls pressing against his chest. Finally, just before dawn, his strength failed. His hands opened and he let go. His body dropped, only for a heartbeat, before his feet touched solid ground. He staggered, stunned, and turned to see. The earth was there, firm and safe, less than a single step below where he had hung. The abyss he had feared was nothing but an illusion of night shadows. All along he had been clinging to the rope in terror, suspended just inches above safety. The traveler laughed, though his voice shook with disbelief. Relief flooded him, washing away the fear that had tormented him through the long night. The ground beneath his feet felt like a miracle. He looked up at the cliffside, the vine swaying gently where his hands had clutched it so fiercely. In that moment he realized the truth. It was not the cliff, nor the darkness, nor death that had held him prisoner. It was his own mind. His fear, his refusal to let go, his desperate belief in danger. The rope had not saved him. It had kept him trapped. He knelt down on the earth, touched the soil with his palms, and breathed deeply. The mountain was silent, the sky pale with morning light. Birds began to sing as if welcoming him into a new day. He stood slowly, lighter now, for he carried no longer the burden of his fear. When he continued down the path, his steps were not hurried but steady and calm. Each footfall reminded him, the ground is always nearer than the mind imagines. The story of the traveler and the rope teaches that fear is often nothing more than an illusion. We cling tightly to our anxieties, believing they are lifelines, when in truth, they bind us to suffering. Zen reminds us, let go, and you will see the ground beneath your feet. To release fear is not to fall into emptiness, but to return to the earth that has always been there, waiting. In letting go, we discover that safety and peace are never far. They are just one step below the grasp of our anxious mind. Story 5. The Monk and the Heavy Load. On a quiet path through the countryside of Japan, two monks once walked together after visiting a nearby village. The road was lined with tall grasses that swayed gently in the wind, and the sound of flowing water accompanied them from a stream that wound through the fields. The sky was soft with the color of late afternoon, and the earth smelled of damp soil after morning rain. Their journey was not hurried. They had all the time the day could give. The two monks were close in age, but different in temperament. One carried his robes with ease, his steps light as if the ground itself welcomed him. His gaze was soft, always noticing the dragonflies, the rustling trees, the subtle changes of the wind. The other monk walked with heavier steps, his brow furrowed as though every mile pressed upon him with unseen weight. Earlier that day, they had helped a villager carry bundles of grain across a muddy road. One monk had lifted the burden, carried it across, and set it down without a word. The other monk had done the same, but even after setting the grain down, he seemed to keep carrying it in his mind. Now, hours later, as they walked through the fading light, the difference between them grew clearer with each step. The path stretched onward toward the monastery where they would spend the night. The air grew cooler and silence rested between them, broken only by the distant call of birds returning to their nests. And yet, inside one monk's mind, silence had not yet arrived. As they walked, the heavier monk suddenly sighed. His companion glanced at him, but said nothing. Another mile passed before the sigh grew into words. "Brother," the heavy-hearted monk said, "I cannot understand you. How can you walk as though nothing weighs upon you? We carried the same load this morning, yet still I feel its weight pressing upon me." The lighter monk smiled gently, his eyes still following the flutter of a butterfly nearby. "We carried the same load, yes, but I set it down at the roadside. Perhaps you are still carrying it." The heavy monk frowned. "What do you mean? I placed the bundle on the ground, just as you did." "Yes," said the other, "but while your hands are free, your mind is still holding on. You are walking not only with your body, but also with your burden." The heavy monk grew silent. His feet scuffed the dirt as he thought. Indeed, ever since they had left the village, he had replayed the moment again and again, the mud clinging to his robes, the strain in his shoulders, the villagers' hurried thanks. The memory followed him, as real as if the bundle still lay across his back. Meanwhile, his companion walked freely, his posture relaxed, his breath steady. He hummed softly, a tune carried by the wind. The heavy monk could not help but feel frustrated. "But how can I put it down? The memory is there whether I want it or not." The lighter monk paused and pointed toward the stream that ran alongside the path. The water flowed endlessly, carrying leaves and petals downstream. "Do you see the stream? It accepts whatever falls into it, and it does not hold on. The leaf floats for a while, then drifts away. The water does not chase after it." The heavy monk watched the stream, the leaves spinning slowly before disappearing around a bend. He stood still for a long time, listening to the water's constant murmur. He realized that his own mind had been clinging like a closed fist, unwilling to release what had already passed. They resumed walking. This time, the heavy monk tried to let his thoughts move like the leaves, appearing, drifting, then vanishing. At first, it was difficult. The memory clung stubbornly, as if tied by unseen threads. But each time it returned, he whispered silently, "I set you down." Gradually, the weight lifted. His shoulders straightened, his steps grew lighter. The path no longer seemed so long. He began to notice the color of the sky deepening into twilight, the fragrance of wildflowers along the road, the song of crickets beginning their nightly chorus. By the time they reached the gates of the monastery, the heavy monk no longer felt the invisible burden. He bowed to his companion with gratitude. "Brother, I see now. The heaviest load is not the one on the back, but the one we refuse to put down in our minds." The lighter monk bowed in return. "Yes, to carry what is necessary and to release what is not, that is the way of freedom." They entered the monastery side by side, robes brushing quietly against the wooden threshold. The night embraced them with stillness, and for the first time that day, both walked without weight. The two monks remind us that burdens are not only physical, they live in our minds long after the task is finished. One bundle of grain can weigh 1,000 pounds if carried in thought. Zen whispers, "The heaviest weight is the one we choose not to release." To put down what has already passed is to open space for peace. Like the flowing stream, we can allow memories, worries, and regrets to drift by without grasping. In letting go, we walk lighter, and every step becomes freedom. Story 6. The Farmer's Luck. In a quiet village surrounded by green hills and winding rivers, there lived a humble farmer. His house was simple, with walls made of clay and a roof of straw. Yet his fields stretched wide across fertile soil. The rhythm of his life followed the seasons, planting in spring, tending in summer, harvesting in autumn, and resting in winter. Each day began with the rising sun and ended with the call of crickets in the fields. The villagers often gathered in the square to share news, to trade grain, and to speak of fortune and misfortune. They loved to judge events quickly, declaring something to be lucky or unlucky almost before it had finished happening. A child's good health was a blessing, a broken tool a curse, a sudden storm both feared and celebrated, depending on whose crops it watered. The farmer, however, was known for his quiet way. He did not rush to praise nor condemn. When neighbors argued loudly about whose fate was better, he simply smiled. Yet even he was not free from the unexpected turns of life. For in that village, one small event set in motion a series of happenings that none could predict. It began with a horse, strong, spirited, and restless. The villagers admired it as a sign of prosperity. But as soon as the horse ran away into the hills, they gathered at the farmer's door, shaking their heads in pity and declaring his luck ruined. The farmer only bowed his head and replied, "Maybe so, maybe not." Days passed, and the farmer continued his work in the fields as if nothing had happened. He plowed the soil, sowed seeds, and tended his garden. The neighbors, however, whispered among themselves. "How unlucky he is," they said. "Without his horse, his work will be twice as hard." Some pitied him, others secretly felt relieved that their own fortunes seemed better. But one morning, as the mist still clung to the valley, the farmer's horse returned. And not alone. It brought with it a group of wild horses, strong and untamed. The villagers gasped. They gathered once again, this time praising the farmer. "What great luck!" they exclaimed. "Now you have not one horse but many. Surely the heavens favor you." The farmer bowed his head once more and said quietly, "Maybe so, maybe not." His son, a young man full of energy, began training the wild horses. He spent long hours in the fields, guiding, riding, and taming their wild spirit. But one afternoon, while attempting to ride the strongest of them, he fell. The sound of his cry echoed across the fields, and when the villagers arrived, they found his leg broken. "Oh, how terrible!" they cried. "Such misfortune has come upon your family. First the horse ran away, then it brought luck, and now it has brought disaster. Your son will be crippled for weeks, perhaps forever." Again, the farmer's voice was calm, his eyes steady. "Maybe so, maybe not." The weeks that followed were difficult. The son limped about, unable to help in the fields. Neighbors shook their heads, convinced that the family's fortune had truly fallen. Yet life continued. The sun rose, crops grew, rains came and went. Then news spread through the village. The emperor's army was passing through, demanding young men to join the war. Soldiers arrived, knocking on doors, pulling sons from their homes. Families wept as their boys were taken away, perhaps never to return. When they reached the farmer's house, they saw his son sitting with his leg bound in splints. The captain shook his head. "He is of no use to us," he declared, and left him behind. The villagers returned later, their faces pale with sorrow. Many of their sons had been taken, but the farmer's son remained. "How fortunate you are," they said with envy. "Your son has been spared." The farmer looked at them gently. "Maybe so, maybe not." Seasons changed, and the story of the farmer became a lesson the villagers never forgot. Some who once pitied him now admired him. Some who envied him realized how quickly fortune turns. But the farmer himself remained unchanged, calm, steady, unmoved by praise or blame. For he knew that what we call luck or misfortune is only a fragment of a larger picture, one that the mind cannot see in its entirety. And so he lived each day as it was, without clinging to the idea of blessing or curse. For the truth was simple: life unfolds beyond the labels we give it. The farmer's story shows that fortune and misfortune are but shifting shadows. What seems like disaster today may protect us tomorrow. What feels like blessing may lead to pain. Zen teaches us not to cling to labels, for they blind us to the deeper flow of life. As the saying goes, who knows what is good, who knows what is bad? By letting go of judgment, we find peace in the present moment. To live like the farmer is to walk lightly, knowing that every event is part of a greater unfolding, neither curse nor blessing, simply life itself. Story 7. The Burnt Rice. In a small monastery nestled in the hills, life was guided by the rhythm of simplicity. The day began with morning bells, soft chants rising with the mist, and the steady routine of sweeping courtyards, tending gardens, and preparing meals. Among the young novices training under the guidance of their master, each task was seen as part of their practice. cooking rice, washing bowls, carrying water. All were opportunities to touch the spirit of Zen. One novice in particular was eager to please. His heart was full of devotion, yet his hands were still clumsy. When it was his turn to cook the evening meal, he felt the weight of responsibility. The older monks waited quietly, and the master sat in stillness as the fragrance of smoke began to drift from the kitchen. The novice's heart sank. Something had gone terribly wrong. The novice rushed to the pot, lifting the lid in alarm. A dark cloud of smoke curled upward, stinging his eyes. The rice at the bottom had burned, sticking stubbornly to the iron pot, its blackened edges filling the room with a bitter scent. His hands trembled as he stirred, but it was too late. The meal was ruined. Panic swelled inside him. "What will the master say?" he whispered to himself. Images flooded his mind, harsh words, disappointment, the shame of failure. His chest tightened, and he could barely breathe. Every grain of burnt rice seemed a reminder of his inadequacy. Carrying the pot to the dining hall felt like carrying a heavy stone. He lowered his head as the steam and smoke followed him. The other novices exchanged glances, the smell announcing the truth before a word was spoken. The young monk placed the bowls before his master, his eyes fixed on the floor, waiting for judgment. The master picked up his chopsticks, lifted a mouthful of rice, and paused. Silence filled the hall. The novice's heart pounded, each second stretching like an eternity. Finally, the master smiled and said softly, "The taste of smoke is also rice." The words fell like gentle rain on dry soil. The novice lifted his eyes, unsure he had heard correctly. The master ate calmly, his face serene, savoring each bite as though nothing was wrong. The other monks followed, some hiding smiles, some nodding quietly. The meal continued without criticism, without blame. Tears welled in the novice's eyes. He realized that his fear of imperfection had been heavier than the burnt rice itself. The master had shown him that a mistake was not the end, but simply part of the meal, part of life. That evening, after the hall had emptied, the novice returned to the kitchen. He scraped the pot clean, the charred bits falling away into the bucket of water. Yet as he worked, his heart felt lighter than it had in days. The clinging burnt rice no longer felt like failure. It was simply what had happened. He whispered to himself, "The taste of smoke is also rice." From that day forward, he approached his duties with less fear and more presence. When he swept, he did not rush to finish perfectly. When he cooked, he did not cling to flawless results. And when mistakes happened, he smiled, knowing that life itself was never perfect, yet always whole. The memory of burnt rice became his teacher, reminding him to accept the imperfect moments with the same grace as the perfect ones. In time, he discovered that peace was not found in avoiding mistakes, but in embracing them. The story of the burnt rice reveals the wisdom of embracing imperfection. We often believe that only flawless outcomes are worthy, yet Zen teaches that every moment, burnt or fragrant, smooth or broken, is part of the whole. As the master said, "The taste of smoke is also rice." To let go of perfection is to breathe freely, to release the fear of mistakes, and to discover the quiet joy hidden in every experience. When we stop demanding that life be flawless, we begin to taste its richness exactly as it is, smoke, rice, and all. Story 8. The Master and the Robber. In a remote village at the edge of the mountains, people often lived in fear of bandits. The roads that wound through the forests were dangerous at night, and travelers rarely carried much for fear of losing everything to robbers. Yet in the heart of this same region, there was a small hut by a quiet pond where a Zen master lived in simplicity. His days were filled with meditation, teaching, and tending to the garden that grew by the water's edge. The villagers often wondered why he lived so openly, without locks on his doors, without guards to protect him. "Does he not fear the thieves?" they whispered. But the master only smiled and said, "If they come, I will have nothing to lose." His life was so modest that the only treasures he held were a wooden bowl, a worn robe, and the peace within his heart. One autumn night, Under a clear sky filled with stars, a desperate robber crept into the hut. He had heard of the master's calm, and he thought perhaps some hidden wealth lay there. But what he found was only a man sitting silently with a lantern glowing beside him, and the reflection of the moon shimmering on the pond outside. The robber entered, his footsteps heavy, his voice rough with threat. "Old man," he growled, "give me everything you have, or I will harm you." The master looked up with gentle eyes. He did not flinch, nor did he resist. Instead, he motioned to the shelf where his belongings rested. "Take what you wish," he said softly. The robber grabbed the bowl, the robe, and the lantern. His face twisted in confusion. "Is this all? Where is the gold, the coins, the valuables?" The master chuckled lightly, his voice warm like the evening breeze. "You have taken what I possess, but if you wish, I can also give you the moon reflected in the pond." The robber froze, startled by the words. He turned to see the silver moon dancing on the rippling water outside. For a moment, his anger faltered. "Do you mock me?" he asked. "No," the master replied. "All that I have is already yours. Even this moonlight, I offer it freely." The robber's hands shook as he clutched the items. He had expected fear, resistance, perhaps even a fight. Instead, he received a gift, one he could not carry. His heart stirred with something unfamiliar, shame mixed with awe. He left the hut quickly, stumbling into the night. The bowl clattered against his side, the robe weighed heavily in his arms, but his mind was restless. No matter how far he walked, he could not forget the master's calm, the unshakable freedom in his eyes. At dawn, he returned. He placed the bowl and robe at the master's door. "I came to steal," he admitted, "but you gave me more than I could take. Why?" The master looked at him kindly. "Because nothing belongs to me. When you understand this, you too will be free." The robber bowed, his rough face softened by tears. That day, he laid down the path of theft, carrying instead the lesson of a gift greater than gold. The gift of letting go. The story of the master and the robber reminds us that true wealth lies not in possessions, but in freedom from attachment. When nothing is clung to, nothing can be stolen. As Zen teaches, the moon cannot be taken, yet it lights the world. To live without possessiveness is to live without fear. In giving away even what little he had, the master revealed that the heart is richest when it holds nothing. To let go of ownership is to discover a treasure no thief can touch, the boundless peace of a mind that claims nothing as mine. Story 9. The Old Man and the Bridge. At the edge of a quiet village, a wooden bridge stretched across a slow, winding river. The bridge was old, its planks darkened with time, and its posts leaned slightly after years of wind and rain. Each day, villagers crossed it to reach the fields, the market, or the path that led into the mountains. Though worn, the bridge still carried their footsteps faithfully. Among those who lived nearby was an old man who feared the bridge. Every morning he sat on a stone beside the riverbank, watching others walk across. He shook his head at their confidence, muttering warnings under his breath. In his mind, the bridge was always on the verge of collapse. He imagined the planks snapping, people falling into the current, swept away by the water. His fear grew so constant that he never dared cross. Instead, he built his life around avoiding the bridge, limiting his days to one side of the river. The villagers pitied him, some laughed gently, but most simply accepted his habit. The old man, though safe, carried the weight of dread in his chest. And then one morning, as the mist still lingered above the river, a Zen monk came walking down the path. The monk wore simple robes the color of earth and carried a walking staff polished smooth by years of travel. His face was serene, his steps measured, as though each footfall itself was a form of prayer. When he reached the bridge, the old man called out sharply. "Stop! Do not cross," the old man warned. "The bridge is weak. One day it will break, and you will fall into the river. Better to stay here than risk your life." The monk paused, studying the old man's weathered face. His eyes softened, and he offered a gentle bow. Then, without a word, he placed his foot upon the first plank. The bridge creaked beneath his weight. The old man gasped, clutching his chest. But the monk continued, step by step, the wood groaning faintly yet holding firm. Halfway across, the monk paused to rest his staff. He turned his head slightly and spoke in a calm, clear voice. "Do you see, old friend? The bridge has not broken." The old man shook his head furiously. "Not today, perhaps, but it might tomorrow, or the next day. Why gamble with your life?" The monk smiled and took another step. "If the bridge breaks tomorrow, then tomorrow I will swim. Why let it collapse in my heart today before it has collapsed in truth?" The old man fell silent, his breath caught, tangled in the monk's words. For years he had lived in the shadow of fear, treating each step as though disaster were certain. The monk's perspective was so simple, yet it cracked open the wall of dread he had built around himself. The monk reached the far side of the bridge, then turned and walked back across with the same steady calm. When he returned to the old man's side, he sat upon the same stone and gazed at the river. "Do you fear the water?" the monk asked. "Yes," the old man admitted. "I fear drowning." The monk dipped his hand into the current. "The water flows gently. It holds no malice. If you enter it with calm, it will carry you as it carries the leaves. But you have drowned yourself already, each day, in your thoughts." The old man's eyes filled with tears. He remembered all the times he had avoided visiting friends across the river, all the markets he had skipped, all the sunsets he had missed on the far bank, because of a collapse that had never come. The monk rose, offering his hand. "Come, walk with me." Trembling, the old man stood. His knees shook, his heart pounded. But he placed one foot onto the bridge. It groaned beneath him, and he froze. The monk placed his staff lightly on the wood and nodded. "Breathe. Do not live in tomorrow's fear. Step into today." The old man inhaled slowly, then exhaled. He took another step, then another. Halfway across, he felt his chest loosen. The river flowed calmly below, the birds wheeled in the air above, and nothing broke. By the time he reached the far bank, he was laughing softly, the sound of release echoing like a song. For the rest of his days, the old man still respected the bridge. He walked carefully, never reckless. But he no longer sat frozen on the riverbank, waiting for a collapse that had not yet come. He learned that his true prison had not been the bridge, but the fear he carried within. And once he let that fear go, the whole river seemed to shine. The story of the old man and the bridge shows us that fear of the future often imprisons us more than reality itself. We build bridges of dread in our minds, crossing them again and again before they even exist. Zen reminds us, why let it collapse in your heart before it collapses in truth? To release imagined fear is to return to the present, where life flows steady like the river. By letting go of tomorrow's worries, we find that today is safe, and the path beneath our feet is already whole. Story 10. The Monk and the Empty Scroll. In a monastery hidden deep within the misty mountains of China, there lived an old Zen master whose wisdom was known far beyond the valley. Students came from distant provinces, carrying questions in their hearts and hope in their eyes. Some sought peace, some sought knowledge, and others came searching for the secret of enlightenment. The master welcomed them all with the same quiet smile, teaching not only through words but through silence, gesture, and daily tasks. Among these seekers was a young student, eager and restless. He had memorized countless sutras, copied scriptures until his fingers cramped, and filled his notebooks with commentaries. Yet still, clarity eluded him. The more he read, the more tangled his thoughts became, as if trying to untie a knot by pulling its ends tighter. One morning, after a long meditation, he approached the master with a request. "Master," he said, bowing deeply, "please write for me the essential teaching, the one key that will unlock enlightenment. Give me words to hold on to, so I may walk the path with certainty." The master looked at him gently, his eyes like still water. Without speaking, he reached for a brush, unrolled a fresh scroll of paper, and laid it before the student. The young student's heart leapt. He watched eagerly as the master dipped the brush into ink. He expected profound characters, a secret verse, perhaps a phrase like lightning across his mind. He leaned forward, hardly breathing, but the master wrote nothing. Instead, he placed the brush down, rolled the scroll back up, and handed it to the student with both hands. The student blinked in confusion. "Master, it is blank." "Yes," the master replied, smiling. "This is the teaching." The student unrolled the scroll again, searching desperately for hidden marks. His eyes scanned every corner of the paper, but it was pure white, untouched. "I don't understand," he said, his voice trembling. "How can this empty page be the path to enlightenment? Where are the instructions? Where is the wisdom?" The master poured tea into 2 cups and slid one across the table. "Drink," he said. The student sipped, but his mind raced. He wanted to protest, to beg for clarity, yet the master said nothing more. The silence stretched, filled only by the sound of wind brushing through the bamboo outside. At last, the student broke. "Master, I came here to learn. I came for words that would guide me. How can emptiness be a lesson?" The master looked at him kindly. "Your mind is already crowded with words. Each one fights for space, and you cling to them as if they could carry you across the river. But enlightenment is not found in words. It is found in the space between them." The student lowered his gaze, shame and frustration mixing in his chest. For years he had gathered teachings like treasures, filling scroll after scroll, and yet here his master offered him nothing. Could nothing truly be everything? That night he sat in his cell staring at the blank scroll. At first it mocked him, reminding him of all he did not understand. He tried to imagine what the master might have meant. Perhaps it was a puzzle, perhaps invisible ink. He held it up to the lantern, examined its fibers, searched for hidden symbols. There were none. Hours passed. Exhausted, he placed the scroll on the floor beside him. In the silence he noticed his own breathing. In the stillness, he felt the weight of his thoughts begin to soften. The page was simply white, silent, open, like the space of his own mind when he finally stopped searching. For the first time he saw not a lack of teaching, but the teaching itself. Emptiness. Freedom. The scroll was not incomplete. It was whole in its silence. It did not add to his burden of concepts. It stripped them away. The next morning the student returned to the master. He bowed low, pressing his forehead to the ground. "Master," he whispered, "the page is full after all." The master nodded, his smile deep as the mountain. "Now you see, the paper was always complete. It was you who had to empty yourself to recognize it." From then on, the student carried the scroll not as a puzzle, but as a mirror. Whenever his mind grew restless with theories and doubts, he unrolled the blank sheet. Its silence reminded him to release his grasping, to rest in the open field of awareness. And in that openness, the wisdom of Zen blossomed, not in words, but in the spaces where words fall away. The empty scroll is a reminder that wisdom cannot be owned or captured in letters. We seek teachings like treasures, but the greatest teaching is the emptiness that allows life to flow. As the Zen saying goes, when the page is empty, the whole world can be written upon it. To cling to words is to weigh the mind with stones. To embrace silence is to open the sky. By letting go of the hunger for explanations, we discover the truth already here, clear, simple, boundless, like a blank scroll awaiting nothing at all. You have journeyed through 10 Zen stories, each a small mirror of letting go. Now let us continue with the 11th, the tale of a woman, a cracked pot, and the hidden beauty of imperfection. Story 11, The Woman and the Broken Pot. In a small village where dusty paths wound between rice fields and humble cottages, there lived a woman who carried water each day from the river to her home. It was a long walk, nearly an hour each way, and she balanced a wooden pole across her shoulders with a clay pot hanging from each side. One pot was sturdy and whole, round and strong, holding every drop of water until she reached her house. The other pot, however, had a long crack down its side. Each day, as she walked, water dripped slowly onto the earth. By the time she arrived, the broken pot was only half full. The woman often sighed when she emptied the pots. She felt ashamed of the cracked one, believing it made her work harder and less useful. She even considered discarding it, replacing it with a new one. But life was simple in the village, and clay was costly. So she continued to use both pots, carrying them every morning beneath the rising sun, though always with a heavy heart. For years, she believed the broken pot was her burden. Only later would she discover that its flaw was a hidden gift. The woman's mornings always began the same way. She tied back her hair, lifted the wooden pole across her shoulders, and walked barefoot toward the river. The sturdy pot sat with quiet pride, heavy and reliable. The cracked pot swayed uneasily, dripping a thin line of water that darkened the soil along the path. As she walked, villagers sometimes nodded kindly, but she avoided their gaze. She imagined them whispering about her clumsy pot, laughing at her wasted effort. In truth, most noticed little, but the woman carried her shame as heavily as the water itself. At the river she filled both pots. She watched them swell with life, their round bellies glistening. Then she turned back, the sun warming her shoulders, the air filled with the scent of earth and grass. With every step, the water leaked from the crack, pattering softly onto the ground. The sound pierced her heart like a reminder of failure. One morning, as she bent to set down the pots, she sighed deeply. "You are broken," she whispered to the cracked vessel. "You rob me of strength and give me only half your worth. How I wish you were whole." The pot, though silent, seemed to listen, and the earth, quietly drinking the spilled water, was already preparing its reply. Weeks passed, and the woman noticed something unusual along the path. Tiny shoots of green had begun to appear where the water dripped each day. At first she paid little attention, but soon the shoots became stems, and the stems blossomed into bright wildflowers, yellow, blue, and white, swaying in the breeze. One morning, as she walked home, the cracked pot leaking as always, she stopped and gazed at the path. Both sides of the road were dry and bare, except for the side where the water spilled. There, the flowers lined the trail like a ribbon of color, guiding her steps with beauty she had never seen before. She realized then that the broken pot had been watering the earth all along, nurturing the blossoms that now danced in sunlight. The flaw she had despised was the very reason the flowers grew. Tears filled her eyes. She touched the pot gently, whispering, "Forgive me. I thought you were weak, but you have been giving in ways I could not see." From that day forward she walked the path with new joy. She no longer cursed the dripping water, but cherished it. The flowers became her companions, their fragrance sweetening the air, their colors brightening her mornings. Neighbors began to admire the trail, asking how it had become so beautiful. The woman smiled, but said little. She knew the truth, that what once seemed broken had created something whole. Years later, when her hair had turned silver, she still carried the two pots. The sturdy one remained strong, the cracked one still dripping. But now, each morning as she set out, the flowers bowed in the breeze as if in gratitude. And she herself walked lighter, no longer ashamed of imperfection, but grateful for its gifts. The cracked pot shows us that imperfection is not weakness, but possibility. What we see as flaws may water the hidden seeds of beauty. As the Zen saying goes, the crooked tree lives its full life, the straight one is cut for timber. In the same way, our cracks and scars may be the very paths through which life flows. To let go of shame is to see that even brokenness has its place, and that our worth is not in perfection, but in presence. Flowers bloom along the path of those who walk with their whole selves. Story 12. The Candle in the Storm. Far from the safety of villages, on a lonely mountain path, a traveler once found himself caught in the sudden violence of a storm. The sky darkened without warning, clouds rushing together like armies in battle. Wind howled through the trees, bending their branches, and rain lashed against the earth in sheets of silver. In the midst of this chaos, the traveler clutched a small candle he had lit earlier at a temple. It was not a candle of luxury or ceremony, but to him it held meaning, a reminder of prayer, of hope, of warmth in the vast night. As the storm grew fierce, he cupped his hands desperately around the fragile flame. Every gust threatened to snuff it out. His body bent forward, his breath shallow, his arms aching from guarding that tiny light. Each step was a struggle, his sandals slipping on wet stone, his robe heavy with water. Yet still he shielded the candle, as if its flame was his very life. Fear whispered that if the light died, all would be lost. And so, trembling, he battled wind and rain, carrying the candle through the storm, clinging to the hope of keeping it alive. The storm raged mercilessly, its voice a chorus of thunder and shrieking wind. The traveler staggered onward, holding the candle close, pressing it to his chest, then raising his cupped hands to guard it. Raindrops struck his fingers, the flame flickered violently, and each time it dimmed he felt panic swell inside him. Hours seemed to pass in this struggle, though it was perhaps only minutes. His mind was consumed by one thought. Do not let the flame die. He forgot the path beneath his feet, forgot the world around him, forgot even his own exhaustion. All his being narrowed into the trembling glow within his palms. Yet the storm was stronger. A sudden gust roared down the mountainside, and with a hiss the flame went out. Smoke curled upward, thin and final. The traveler froze, his heart sinking. His shoulders slumped, and he felt as if the world had ended. For so long he had fought to protect this small light, and now it was gone. Tears mixed with rain on his cheeks. He sank to his knees, clutching the extinguished candle. The wind whipped his hair, the rain pounded his back, and despair washed through him. All is lost, he whispered. But then, slowly, he lifted his eyes. Through the thinning clouds, a pale glow spread across the horizon. The storm, fierce as it had been, had begun to break. The black sky softened into gray, then into silver. And then, with sudden brilliance, the sun rose. Golden light spilled across the valley, piercing the mist, turning the wet leaves into shimmering jewels. The mountains glowed with fresh color. The river below caught fire with morning reflection. The traveler stared, his breath stolen by the majesty of the dawn. In that moment, he laughed through his tears. The candle had been precious, yes, but the light of the sun was greater, vast, unshakable, beyond the reach of storm or hand. He realized he had clung so tightly to a single fragile flame that he had forgotten the greater source of brightness waiting beyond the night. He rose slowly, his body weary, but his heart unburdened. He placed the extinguished candle gently into his pouch. Its flame was gone, but its lesson remained. The storm had not destroyed him. It had revealed a truth, that control is an illusion, and surrender can uncover a light brighter than anything we protect. With steady steps, he continued down the path, no longer afraid of the storm, no longer clinging to what must pass. Above him, the sky opened wide, and the sun's warmth spread across his shoulders like a blessing. The candle in the storm teaches that our need to control often blinds us to greater gifts. We cling to fragile flames, fearing their loss, yet life holds a light far beyond them. As the Zen teaching reminds us, when one light goes out, the sky is still full of stars. By releasing the struggle to hold on, we discover that loss is not the end. It is the opening to something larger. The sun rises, whether or not we guard a candle. To let go of control is to awaken to the vast brilliance already shining around us. Story 13. The Monk Who Carried a Woman. The rain had fallen all night, turning the forest paths into rivers of mud. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth, and the morning mist clung to the branches of pine and bamboo. Two monks, traveling together on pilgrimage, walked in silence. Their robes were soaked and heavy, but their hearts were calm, each step placed with mindful care. The path wound through valleys and hills, eventually leading them to a wide puddle that stretched across the road. At its edge stood a young woman, dressed in fine clothes that were now splattered with mud. She looked desperate, unable to cross without ruining her garments. When she saw the monks, her eyes filled with relief. The younger monk, earnest and strict, frowned. Their vows discouraged physical contact with women, and he believed helping her would violate their discipline. The older monk, however, paused and studied her face. She was weary, stranded, and helpless. Without hesitation, he bent down, lifted her onto his back, and carried her across the muddy stretch. On the other side, he set her down gently. She bowed in gratitude, thanked him, and went on her way. The monks continued walking, the forest path stretching ahead in silence. For a while the younger monk said nothing. His jaw was tight, his brows furrowed. Every step seemed heavier than the last. The sound of the older monk's sandals slapping the mud only fueled his agitation. Finally, after hours of holding back, he burst out. "Brother," he said sharply, "how could you do that? We are monks. We are sworn to purity. You touched her, carried her. You broke our discipline. What you did was against the rules." The older monk looked at him quietly. His eyes were soft, his breath steady, as though the words carried no sting. "I set her down back at the road," he said gently, "but you are still carrying her." The younger monk flushed, speechless. His heart raced, his mind filled with arguments. Yet each one collapsed under the weight of the elder's words. He realized that while the woman had long gone on her way, he had held her image in his thoughts, replaying the moment again and again, clinging to judgment like a burden across his shoulders. The rest of the journey unfolded slowly. Birds sang in the treetops, streams gurgled across the path, the air freshened as the storm clouds dispersed. The elder monk walked as lightly as if nothing had happened. The younger monk, however, carried his indignation, the memory of the woman, and the conviction that rules had been broken. Each mile grew longer under this invisible load. As evening approached, they reached a small temple where they would rest for the night. They sat by the fire, drying their robes, steam rising into the dim light. The younger monk could bear it no longer. "I cannot understand," he muttered, shaking his head. "We take vows to avoid temptation, to keep our discipline pure. How can you treat those vows so lightly?" The elder monk smiled. "Discipline is not a cage, it is a boat. It helps us cross the river, but once across, we do not carry the boat on our backs." The younger monk sat in silence, his breath shallow. Slowly, the words began to soften his anger. He realized that his strictness had made him cling to rules like chains. The elder, however, had acted with compassion, then let go. He had carried the woman only long enough to help, then set her down, not only in body but in mind. As the fire crackled, the younger monk looked inward. He saw how often he carried burdens long after they were gone. Arguments from the past, mistakes he had made, harsh judgments of others. Each one weighed him down as surely as a sack of stones. And he saw that letting go was not the same as breaking vows. It was the essence of freedom. That night, as he lay down to rest, the younger monk whispered to himself, "I too must learn to set things down." From then on, though he remained earnest in his practice, his heart grew softer. The image of the elder carrying the woman became his silent teacher, reminding him that true purity lies not in clinging to form, but in releasing attachment. The story of the monk who carried a woman shows us that bondage is not always in action. It is often in the mind that refuses to let go. Compassion may lift a burden for a moment, but attachment drags it for miles. As Zen reminds us, "I set her down long ago. Why are you still carrying her?" To cling to judgment is to live in the past. To release it is to walk free. True liberation is not in rigid form, but in the spacious heart that can carry lightly and then let go. Story 14. The Shadow on the Wall. High in the mountains, where mist coiled around jagged peaks and silence ruled the valleys, stood an old monastery carved partly into stone. Behind the main hall stretched a series of caves, cool and dark, where monks often went to meditate in solitude. The walls of these caves were rough and uneven, their shadows shifting with the smallest flicker of light. One evening, a young novice entered one of the caves to practice. He carried no lamp, only his breath and his determination to sit through the night. At first, the stillness soothed him. He listened to the drip of water echoing through the cavern, felt the cold stone beneath his legs, and let his thoughts drift away. But as the hours deepened and the night grew colder, fear crept into his heart. On the far wall of the cave, a shape began to form. In the dim light spilling faintly from outside, it twisted and stretched. Long arms, hollow eyes, a mouth wide as if in silent scream. The boy's blood ran cold. He gasped, his body trembling. To him, it was no shadow but a demon, watching from the dark. The novice's breath grew ragged. Every sound in the cave seemed to magnify. The drip of water turned sinister. The rustle of wind sounded like whispers. His imagination raced, painting the shadow darker with each heartbeat. He tried to steady himself, to remember the teachings of stillness, but terror gripped him tightly. Finally, unable to bear it, he bolted from the cave. His sandals slapped against the stone floor as he ran into the courtyard, his robe flapping like a frightened bird's wings. There he found his master, sitting calmly beneath a pine tree, eyes half closed in meditation. "Master!" the novice cried, kneeling breathlessly. "There is a demon in the cave. Its shadow looms upon the wall. I could feel its gaze upon me. I feared it would consume me." The old master opened his eyes, soft and clear as morning sky. He regarded the boy kindly, then rose without a word. Taking a small torch from the altar, he motioned for the novice to follow. Together, they walked back toward the cave. The novice's legs trembled, but the master's steady presence lent him courage. The torch flickered in the night, its glow casting warm circles on the damp stone walls. When they entered the cave, the boy clutched his robe tightly. The shadow was still there, dark, monstrous, sprawled across the wall as though waiting. He pointed with shaking hand. "There! Do you see it?" The master lifted the torch higher and stepped closer to the wall. The light spilled into the crevices of the stone, revealing the truth. Hanging on a jagged rock was nothing more than an old, tattered robe left behind by another monk. The folds of the cloth, caught in the dim light, had stretched into grotesque shapes. The master touched the robe gently, its fabric frayed and worn thin. He turned to the novice and smiled. "Your demon is nothing but cloth and shadow. It is your mind that gave it teeth and eyes." The boy's mouth fell open. Relief washed over him, followed quickly by embarrassment. How easily his mind had deceived him, how quickly his fear had built a prison around him. The master lowered the torch and spoke softly, his voice echoing in the cavern. "This is how fear works. It takes the unknown and fills it with monsters. But when light enters, the illusion dissolves. Remember this, my son. Most demons you encounter will be shadows of your own making." The novice bowed his head, tears stinging his eyes. He realized that his fear had not been born of reality, but of imagination. The demon had never been there, only his mind's projection upon the wall. They left the cave together. Outside, the night sky was vast and filled with stars. The boy looked upward, breathing deeply for the first time since his fright. He understood then that fear thrives in darkness, but with the smallest light, whether a torch or awareness, it fades into nothing. From that night on, the novice no longer avoided the caves. When shadows stretched strangely on the walls, he sat calmly, remembering his master's torch. Fear came still, but he learned to greet it as an illusion, not an enemy. And with each passing day, his heart grew steadier, his mind clearer, until the cave itself became a place of refuge rather than dread. The shadow on the wall teaches us that fear is often nothing more than illusion, our own mind painting shapes upon the unknown. What terrifies us in the dark may be only a robe, a branch, or a thought. As Zen reminds us, fear is the shadow of the mind. When light comes, it vanishes. To release the grip of imagined demons is to see reality as it is, plain, simple, harmless. When we shine awareness upon our fears, we discover that what we dreaded was never truly there. In letting go, the heart rests in peace. Story 15. The Old Master's Shoes. In a monastery tucked at the base of a quiet mountain, monks lived simply, their lives measured by the sound of bells and the rhythm of daily practice. Their possessions were few: a robe, a bowl, and a pair of sandals to walk the stony paths between village, temple, and forest. Among them was a young disciple who struggled with dissatisfaction. His sandals were old, their straps fraying, their soles worn thin. Each step on gravel stung his feet, and he found himself thinking constantly about how unfair it was. He compared his shoes with others, envied their condition, and let bitterness fester in his heart. One morning he approached his teacher with a complaint. "Master," he said, "my sandals are painful and old. I cannot walk comfortably in them. Please, may I have a new pair?" The old master studied him, then slowly removed his own sandals. They were far older, their leather cracked, their size much larger than the disciple's feet. He handed them over without a word. The young man's heart leapt at first, thinking he had received something better. But when he slipped them on, he quickly realized they were too big, loose, and awkward, impossible to walk in with steadiness. The disciple stumbled across the courtyard, the sandals flapping against his heels. Every few steps he nearly tripped, his toes struggling to grip. Frustration surged through him. "Master, these are worse than mine. They do not fit at all." The old master chuckled softly, his eyes gleaming with calm. "Indeed, you suffer now because they are too large. And earlier you suffered because yours were too small. Do you see? The suffering does not come from the sandals themselves, but from your mind's insistence that they must be otherwise." The disciple froze, the words sinking into him like stones falling into water. For days he had cursed his old sandals, imagining that relief lay only in something new. Now, in these oversized shoes, he realized the problem had not been the leather beneath his feet, but the endless grasping in his mind. They sat together on the temple steps, the mountains hazy in the morning light. The master continued, "When you cling to comparison, this pair better, that pair worse, you walk unsteadily. But when you release the demand for comfort, even bare feet can carry you lightly." The disciple looked down at his feet. He slipped out of the master's shoes and placed them gently aside. Then he tried his own again, thin, cracked, and worn. To his surprise, they no longer seemed unbearable. They were simply what they were, sandals that had served him faithfully across many roads. The sharp stones underfoot were not enemies. They were reminders of the ground he walked upon. Later that week, as they walked together to the village, the young disciple noticed how villagers trod barefoot along rugged paths, their feet hardened by years of life. They carried firewood, drew water, tended fields, without complaint about what they lacked. He saw children laughing as they ran across gravel, their joy untouched by sharp stones. A quiet realization dawned on him. It was not comfort that made life light, but freedom from clinging. That evening, when he sat to remove his sandals, he bowed to them as one bows to a teacher. He whispered, "Thank you." For the first time, his heart felt gratitude instead of resentment. From then on, whenever his mind grew restless with dissatisfaction, wishing for something newer, softer, or better, he remembered the master's sandals too big to walk in. He remembered the lesson. Happiness is not found in the fit of shoes, but in the fit of the heart with reality. And slowly, step by step, his journey grew lighter, not because the stones disappeared, but because he carried no burden of complaint. The story of the old master's shoes reminds us that pain often comes less from circumstances than from clinging to how we wish them to be. Shoes too small, shoes too large. The real discomfort lies in the mind's demand for perfection. As the Zen teaching says, "Barefoot, I walk more freely." To let go of comparison is to walk without heaviness. When we release the grasping for what fits our desires, even the rough road becomes a teacher. The true path of peace is not paved with new sandals, but with the freedom of a heart that no longer clings. Does this story remind you of something from your own journey? Story 16. The Broken Sword. In the quiet valleys of ancient Japan, where mountains pressed against the sky and rivers cut through the land like veins of silver, stories of warriors traveled further than the sound of temple bells. Among these tales lived the legend of a swordsman once praised as invincible. For decades, his blade moved like wind over grass, silent, unstoppable, and sure. Villages whispered his name with reverence, even lords bowed before his unmatched skill. But time weaves lessons into the fabric of even the strongest lives. On a morning wrapped in mist, in a duel that was meant to be routine, his sword, that faithful companion of decades, snapped in two. The broken blade fell to the earth with a hollow sound, as though announcing the end of an era. His heart, once fierce, trembled. If the sword was gone, what remained of the warrior? Confused and lost, he wandered to a nearby Zen temple where the bells marked the hours of silence instead of battle. There an old Zen master awaited. With calm eyes and weathered hands, the master poured tea and asked nothing of the warrior, until finally the swordsman whispered, "Without my sword, I am nothing." The master's reply began the story of letting go, a lesson deeper than steel. The old swordsman sat in silence beneath the eaves of the temple. His calloused hands, once steady as iron, now trembled as they rested on his knees. Before him lay the broken fragments of his sword, wrapped in a piece of cloth. The blade that had followed him across fields of war and countless duels, now reduced to two cold shards of steel. Every glance at it pierced him deeper than any wound ever had. He remembered the sound it made when it broke, not a clean snap, but a cry, as though the spirit of the sword itself had departed. That sound had followed him into his dreams, into his waking hours, into his every breath. For days he had wandered, carrying the broken weapon as if it were the body of a fallen comrade, until his weary steps brought him here, to the temple, hidden among cedar trees. The master who welcomed him was a man far older than even the warrior. His face was a map of wrinkles carved by time and wind, yet his eyes were clear, like a mountain spring untouched by dust. He asked nothing, and the warrior offered nothing, save for the broken sword laid carefully on the tatami mat. The master looked at it briefly, then poured tea. The steam rose gently, curling and dissolving into the air. The two men sat in silence as the world outside whispered with cicadas and the distant rush of a river. Finally, unable to hold the weight inside, the swordsman spoke. "This sword was my life. With it, I carved my name into the memory of lords and peasants alike. Without it, I am empty. I have lost myself." The master set down his cup, his gaze neither sharp nor soft, but steady. "Have you truly lost yourself?" he asked, "or have you only lost what you clung to?" The warrior frowned. He had faced countless riddles in the clash of blades, but never one like this. "A man without a sword is no warrior," he muttered. "My hands were made to fight. My body was built to conquer. Without the blade, I am nothing but a shell." The master picked up one fragment of the broken sword. He turned it in his hand as if it were a twig or a stone from the path outside. "Steel," he said. "Nothing more. If you place your life inside steel, then when steel breaks, so will you." The words stung. The warrior wanted to protest, to defend the honor of the sword that had served him faithfully. Yet as he looked at the fragment glinting faintly in the afternoon light, he felt the truth ripple within him. He had built his life upon it. He had believed its sharpness was his own sharpness, its strength his own strength. The master placed the fragment down and poured more tea. "When you were young, your body was strong, your eyes clear. You thought your sword made you invincible. But tell me, did the steel move without your hands? Did it strike without your intent? The sword was always empty. It was you who filled it." The warrior sat frozen. Outside, a gust of wind rustled the temple banners. The sound reminded him of battle cries carried away by time. Slowly, he began to see the years for what they were. Victories claimed in his name, yet dependent on the illusion of steel. The master sipped his tea and smiled faintly. "A man who ties his life to a sword is like a bird who believes its cage is the sky. When the cage breaks, the bird panics. Yet the true sky was never the cage. The warrior's breath caught in his throat. His mind, once sharpened by discipline, now staggered under the weight of unfamiliar truth. He remembered nights polishing his blade until it shone like the moon, believing the reflection in the steel was himself. He remembered men bowing in fear not to him, but to the weapon he carried. Now he sat in the temple, no weapon, no fear, no name echoing across provinces, only silence, only himself. The master leaned forward, his voice gentle. Your sword broke so that you could see. If it had remained whole, you would have remained blind. Now the question is not whether you can fight without it. The question is, can you live without it? The warrior lowered his head. Tears, long forbidden by pride, slid down his cheeks. They fell onto the tatami, leaving dark marks that soon faded as if the mat itself absorbed his grief. For the first time in decades, his body felt both heavy and light. Heavy with the weight of years lived in delusion, light with the possibility that perhaps he was more than the steel he carried. That evening, the master took him outside. The forest was alive with cicadas, the air warm with summer. The master handed him a wooden broom. Clean the path, he said simply. The warrior blinked. A broom? His hands, once steady on a sword, trembled as they closed around the handle. He began to sweep, awkward at first, then slowly finding rhythm. Dust rose, leaves gathered, the path cleared. His breath synchronized with each movement, in and out, sweep and return. Hours passed unnoticed. By the time the moon rose, he looked down and saw the path glimmering as though it had been polished by his effort. The master, watching quietly, nodded. Did the broom not feel heavy in your hands? The warrior shook his head. It was light. Then perhaps, the master said, it is not the sword that made you, but the way you hold whatever life places in your hands. In that moment, the warrior understood. Strength was not the blade. Strength was not the name carved into history. Strength was the capacity to meet the present moment, with a sword, with a broom, or with empty hands. That night, he slept in the temple, the broken sword resting outside under the stars. For the first time in years, his dreams were not of battle. They were of rivers flowing, trees swaying, children laughing in distant villages. Dreams of life continuing without steel. The next morning when he woke, he left the fragments of the sword on the temple steps. As he walked away, the morning light touched the broken steel, making it shine once more, not as a weapon, but as a reminder of a lesson learned. The warrior no longer carried a sword, but in his heart, for the first time, he carried peace. Steel is only steel. It does not define the hand that wields it. The broken sword teaches us that clinging to form, fame, or possession makes us fragile. True strength lies not in what we hold, but in how we hold ourselves. As the Zen master said, a bird who mistakes its cage for the sky panics when the cage breaks. But the true sky was always beyond. To let go of the sword is to discover the sky within. Letting go is not loss, it is freedom. Story 17. The Silent Flute. In a quiet monastery nestled between bamboo groves and gentle hills, the sound of wind often replaced the chanting of bells. The monks there lived with simplicity, their days marked by meditation, gardening, and the soft whisper of nature. Among the disciples was a young student with a passion unlike the others. He longed to master the flute. Every evening, when the chores were done and lanterns dimmed, he would sit alone beneath a pine tree with the slender bamboo flute in his hands. His heart yearned to create music that could touch the heavens, that could carry the essence of Zen itself. Yet no matter how much he practiced, the sound was strained, uneven, piercing. His breath was forceful, his fingers tight, his mind restless. Instead of calm melodies, he produced noise that unsettled even the birds in the branches. Frustrated, he begged his master to teach him the secret of perfect sound. The old master simply smiled and said, "Wait, the flute will teach you when you are ready." Days turned into weeks, and the disciple's desperation grew. He pushed harder, blowing with more strength, forcing his breath through the hollow tube as though conquering it. Still, harmony eluded him. Then one afternoon, as the disciple left the flute resting on the table, a sudden breeze entered the hall. The air passed through the flute, releasing a tone so pure and effortless that it filled the room with wonder. The sound lingered in the disciple's ears long after the wind had passed. It was unlike anything he had ever produced in his countless hours of practice. Clear, soft, yet vibrant, it carried with it a quality that seemed not of his doing, but of the world itself. He sat frozen, staring at the flute that lay untouched on the wooden table. "How can it be?" he whispered. "I tried so hard, yet the wind, without effort, without struggle, made the most beautiful sound." The master, who had been sweeping the courtyard nearby, entered the room. His eyes rested on the disciple with a knowing calm. "You heard it," he said simply. "Yes, master," the student replied, his voice trembling between awe and frustration. "But how? I played every day, I gave it everything, and yet in one careless moment, when I wasn't even touching it, the flute sang as it never did for me." The master sat beside him. He lifted the flute gently, feeling the smooth bamboo under his fingers, and then placed it back down. "The flute is hollow," he said. "It does not resist the wind. Its music comes not from force, but from emptiness. You have been trying to fill it with your own strength, but music arises only when you too become hollow." The disciple struggled with the words. His life had been built on striving to be the best student, striving to perfect every practice, striving to earn the praise of his teacher. To let go of striving felt like abandoning everything he knew. That night, he returned to the pine tree with his flute. He sat under the moonlight, bamboo shadows stretching across the ground like brushstrokes of ink. He lifted the flute to his lips and tried again, but the sound came harsh and uneven. His breath burned in his chest, his fingers clenched the instrument. Anger welled up inside him. With a cry, he hurled the flute to the ground. It struck a stone and cracked slightly. He fell to his knees, clutching his head, ashamed and defeated. "I am not meant for music," he muttered. The master appeared as if summoned by the boy's despair. He picked up the cracked flute and turned it in his hands. Instead of scolding, he placed it gently back into the student's lap. "Even broken, bamboo remains bamboo," he said, "and even broken, you remain whole. Why do you measure yourself by perfection?" The disciple looked at the flute, its crack running like a scar across the grain. He hesitated, then raised it again. This time, instead of forcing, he let his breath fall into it softly, like a sigh. The sound that emerged was imperfect, airy, trembling. Yet in that trembling, something shifted within him. It was not beautiful in the way he had imagined, but it was real. It carried the weight of his heart at that moment, fragile, uncertain, but honest. He lowered the flute, tears gathering in his eyes. The master touched his shoulder. "When you stop trying to control the music, it will begin to play through you. Just as the wind passes freely through bamboo, so must life pass freely through your being. Let go, and you will hear." Over the following days, the disciple practiced again, but his practice had changed. He no longer chased perfection. He sat quietly, breathing gently, allowing the sound to emerge without force. Sometimes the notes were uneven, sometimes clear, sometimes nothing more than whispers of air, yet he began to see beauty in all of it. One morning, as dawn painted the sky with pale light, he played without thinking, without effort. The melody drifted like mist over the hills. Birds fell silent to listen. The bamboo groves echoed softly, as though answering him. For the first time, he felt the flute was not an instrument to be conquered, but a companion to be shared. He realized that music was not about him at all. It was the dialogue between breath and emptiness, between effort and surrender, between the self and the vastness of the world. From that day on, the disciple no longer asked his master for the secret. He had heard it, not in the notes of the flute, but in the silence that came before and after each sound. The silent flute teaches us that perfection does not come from force, but from surrender. The harder we grasp, The harsher the sound, the gentler we breathe, the clearer life becomes. As the Master said, the flute is hollow and its beauty lies in emptiness. If you too become hollow, music will flow. In our own lives, we often tighten around expectations and control, only to create noise. When we loosen, when we let go, life itself plays through us. Simple, unforced, and true. Story 18. The Disappearing Footprints. The sea has long been a silent witness to human longing. Along its shores, travelers have walked in search of meaning, leaving their marks upon the sand only to watch them vanish beneath the tide. In one coastal village of old China, a man often wandered by the water's edge, restless and uncertain. He had lived many years, yet doubt still haunted him. Had his life been worthwhile? Were his choices leading him closer to truth, or had he strayed too far? To reassure himself, he looked back at the line of footprints he left behind. Each print, pressed into the soft sand, seemed to testify to his journey, a record of every step. For a while, this comforted him. But the sea, indifferent to his need, rolled forward. With a single wave, the trail disappeared. Panic stirred in his chest as he watched the evidence of his passage dissolve into nothingness. Troubled, he sought out a Zen master who lived near the cliffs, a man known for his calm wisdom. The villager bowed deeply and confessed his fear. If the sea erases my footprints, how can I know that I have truly walked? How can I be sure my path is real? The master looked at him with gentle eyes, then turned his gaze to the waves. And with words as simple as water, he offered a teaching the man would never forget. The villager waited, his heart pounding like the surf against the rocks. The master remained silent for a time, his hands folded in his sleeves, his posture steady as the cliffs behind him. The waves hissed, withdrew, and returned again, each motion unhurried, each cycle complete. Finally, the master spoke. "You are troubled because the sea has taken your footprints," he said. "But tell me, did the sea take your steps as well?" The villager frowned. "My steps? I walked them. But without proof, without marks in the sand, how can they matter?" The master bent down and pressed his palm lightly onto the wet ground. When he lifted it, a faint print remained, glistening in the sunlight. The next wave arrived, sweeping the mark away. "Did my hand not touch the earth?" the master asked softly. "Was the contact less real because the water erased its sign?" The villager lowered his gaze. "No, master. But when I see the print, I know. When it is gone, I doubt." "Then you cling to shadows," the master replied. "The print is only a shadow of the step. The step itself lives in the moment it is made. Once past, it cannot be held, only remembered. Why hold to memory when life is asking you to walk forward?" The villager felt the tide of his thoughts rising and crashing, like the sea itself. He remembered childhood days when he ran along these same shores, laughing with friends. Those prints had vanished, yet the joy of those days had shaped him still. Did it matter that the sand did not remember? The master motioned for him to follow. They walked together along the shore, their robes brushing against seagrass. With each step, prints appeared and disappeared, some lasting longer than others depending on the firmness of the ground. The villager glanced behind him often, but the master kept his eyes forward. Finally, the villager asked, "Do you not look back to see your path?" The master shook his head gently. "The sea does not care for paths. The earth does not keep count. The sky does not record. Only humans bind themselves with the past. When I walk, I walk. When I stop, I stop. There is nothing more." They came to a place where a small stream entered the sea, its water flowing constantly, carrying leaves and petals from the forest above. The master knelt by the stream, cupped water in his hands, and let it slip through his fingers. "Do you see?" he asked. The villager nodded slowly. "The water does not stay, it moves on." "As do you," the master said. "To cling to a single drop is to miss the river. To cling to a single step is to miss the journey. Your life is not written in sand nor measured by footprints. It is written in the living moment, in the breath that fills you now." A gull cried overhead, its wings flashing white against the blue sky. The villager closed his eyes, hearing the sound not as a symbol but as itself, clear, piercing, alive. For a fleeting instant, he felt himself no longer chasing proof of life, but tasting life itself. When he opened his eyes, the master was smiling faintly. "Let the waves take your footprints," he said. "They are not you, you are the step, you are the walk. And when the last wave comes, as it must for all, you will see that there was never a need for the sand to remember, for life itself was your witness." The villager bowed deeply, the salt wind filling his lungs. For the first time in many years, he did not look behind him. Instead, he lifted his gaze to the horizon, where sea and sky met in silence, and he began to walk forward, each step lighter than the last. The vanishing footprints remind us that the past cannot hold us. We spend much of life seeking evidence that we have lived, fearing that if memory fades, meaning is lost. But the Zen teaching is clear. The path does not lie in the sand, but in the step itself. To cling to what is gone is to miss what is here. Letting go of the past does not erase it. It frees us to walk fully in the present. Each breath, each step is the true record of our journey. Story 19. The Cloud That Let Go of the Sky. High above the mountains, where the air is thin and the wind travels without rest, clouds drift endlessly across the sky. They form and dissolve, swell and vanish, never remaining the same for more than a moment. To most, a cloud is nothing but a passing figure, a shadow of vapor destined to fade. Yet in Zen, even the smallest wisp carries a lesson for those willing to see. One such cloud, large and heavy, lingered longer than the rest. It clung stubbornly to its shape, stretching against the blue expanse, as though refusing to change. Unlike the others which danced freely with the wind, this cloud feared the unknown. "If I dissolve," it thought, "I will disappear. Better to remain as I am, fixed in the sky, than to risk becoming nothing." But the sky is vast, and time has no mercy. Winds pushed, sun warmed, and slowly the cloud began to unravel. Terrified, it tried to hold itself together, gathering every wisp into its center. The struggle only brought more pain. And then, in one quiet moment of surrender, the cloud let go. What happened next was not the end, but the beginning of something far greater. The cloud trembled as its edges began to fray. All around it, other clouds shifted without resistance, drifting, thinning, vanishing into light. But this cloud resisted, clinging to its swollen form as if identity itself depended on the thickness of its vapor. For countless days, it hovered above the valley, watching the rivers gleam, the forests sway, and the villages live their daily rhythm. From its great height, it whispered to itself, "I am strong, I endure. I remain while others disappear." Yet beneath this confidence lay a constant fear, the fear of being unmade. One day, as the cloud struggled to bind itself tighter, the wind approached, speaking in the voice of the unseen. "Why do you hold so tightly to your shape?" the wind asked. "Because if I dissolve, I will cease to be," replied the cloud. The wind laughed gently, circling it with invisible arms. "You are not only this shape. You are water. You are mist. You are the sky itself. When you let go, you do not vanish, you transform." But the cloud shuddered. "I cannot risk it. I must endure as I am." The days grew hotter. The sun poured its warmth upon the cloud, heavy with moisture. Unable to resist, the cloud darkened, swollen with weight. Fear grew inside it, yet so too did an ache it could no longer ignore. Finally, overwhelmed, the cloud sighed and released its grip. Raindrops fell, at first slowly, then in a soft, endless stream. The cloud felt itself breaking apart, scattering into countless shining drops. But in that breaking, something miraculous occurred. The raindrops touched the mountain slopes, running into rivulets that fed the streams. They soaked into the earth, quenching the roots of thirsty trees. They filled rice fields where farmers worked, their faces lifting in gratitude to the sky. Children laughed, running barefoot through puddles that reflected the heavens. Flowers bloomed brighter, lifting their delicate heads to drink. The cloud, once terrified of dissolution, now experienced life multiplied 1,000-fold. It was no longer confined to a single form suspended in the sky. It had become the river that sparkled, the leaf that shone, the bloom that opened. As the last of its heavy form dissolved, the cloud whispered with newfound joy, "I have not ended, I have returned." In time the sun drew the water upward once more. Mist rose from fields and rivers, gathering again in the endless dance of the sky. And within that rising mist was the memory of the cloud that had once feared its end, now free, now part of something immeasurable. The sky, vast and patient, held it all. The cloud teaches us that clinging to form is the root of fear. When we insist on remaining the same, we suffer the weight of resistance, but when we release, we discover transformation. As the Zen teaching reminds us, to dissolve is not to die, but to return. Just as the cloud becomes rain, river, and life itself, we too are more than the shapes we hold. By letting go of fixed identity, we return to the larger whole, boundless, infinite, free. Story 20. The Old Lantern. In a small mountain temple, life moved with a rhythm as steady as the ringing of its morning bell. The monks rose before dawn, swept the courtyards, and tended to the garden where vegetables and herbs grew in neat rows. At night, when silence fell, the temple halls were lit not by firecrackers or grand lamps, but by a single old lantern. Its flame flickered faintly, sometimes strong, often weak, yet it had stood there for many years. To the young novice, the lantern was more than an object. He had grown up watching its glow stretch across the wooden floor as he studied his sutras, had sat beside it during long nights of meditation, had carried its light in his heart whenever the winds outside howled. Though the lantern's glass was cracked and its flame unsteady, he loved it with the tender affection one gives to an old friend. So when storms came and the wind blew harder than usual, he shielded it with his small hands, desperate to keep it alive. But no matter his effort, the night came when the flame sputtered, coughed, and died. In darkness he wept, mourning the lantern as though he had lost a part of himself. The next morning his master appeared carrying something wrapped in cloth. When he unveiled it, the young monk blinked through his tears. It was a new lantern, radiant, its light filling every corner of the room. The novice stared at the new lantern as if it were a stranger. Its frame shone with polished wood, its glass uncracked, its flame steady and bright. But in his heart, a pang of resistance rose. "I do not want this," he whispered. "I want the old lantern. Its light may have been weak, but it was ours." The master looked at him with patience. "The flame was never the lantern," he said. "The light you loved has not died, it has simply changed its vessel." Yet the novice clung to his sorrow. That night, though the new lantern shone clearly, he sat in the shadows, gazing at the corner where the old one used to stand. He remembered the nights when its glow danced like a frail heartbeat, when he had felt comfort simply knowing it still burned. The memories brought both warmth and pain, for they belonged to something that no longer existed. The master, noticing his sadness, took him outside. The temple grounds were fresh with the smell of rain, the storm having passed. Puddles reflected the starlight, and the air carried the scent of pine. The master pointed to the horizon where dawn was beginning to break. "Do you mourn the stars when the sun rises?" he asked. The novice frowned. "But the stars vanish. The lantern is gone." "The stars do not vanish," the master said gently. "They are still there, hidden by a brighter light. The lantern, too, has given way so that you may see more clearly." The boy was silent, but the words began to settle in his heart like seeds. Over the following days he forced himself to sit by the new lantern. At first, its brightness seemed harsh, almost unkind. He missed the trembling glow of the old one, the intimacy of its weakness. But slowly, he began to notice how the new light reached corners the old flame never touched, how it steadied his reading, how it warmed the hall more evenly. One evening while copying scriptures he paused. He realized that he had not thought of the old lantern for hours. In its place, the new flame burned calmly, no longer a stranger, but a companion. He smiled faintly, understanding at last. His love for the old lantern had been real, but his sorrow came from mistaking the vessel for the essence. The flame, like light itself, was never bound to one form. It was always flowing, always finding new ways to illuminate. The next morning, he bowed deeply to his master. "Thank you," he said softly. "I see now. If I had clung forever to the old flame, I would never have known this new brightness." The master placed a hand on his shoulder. "So it is with all things in life. To cling is to live in darkness. To let go is to invite new light." And from that day the novice no longer feared the winds that passed through the temple halls. He knew that if one flame went out, another would surely rise, for the essence of light could never be extinguished. The old lantern reminds us that clinging to what is familiar blinds us to new brightness. We often resist change, mistaking endings for loss, when in truth they open the way for greater beginnings. As the master said, the flame was never the lantern, it only found another vessel. To let go of the old is not to betray it, but to honor its gift and step forward. Every flame we love eventually gives way, but light itself never leaves us. Letting go is not darkness. It is the dawn of a clearer day. Have you ever held on to something too tightly, just like the one in this story? Story 21. The Paper Fan. In the quiet summer months, the air inside the Zen monastery often grew heavy with heat. Cicadas sang in the trees, their endless cries rising and falling like waves of fire. Monks moved slowly, their robes clinging to damp skin, their breaths deeper than usual. Amid this sweltering season, one disciple was rarely seen without his fan. It was a simple paper fan, painted long ago with fading brushstrokes of plum blossoms. Over the years, it had frayed, its edges torn, its ribs weakened from constant use. Still, the disciple cherished it dearly. It had accompanied him through many nights of study, through meditations in the hall, through long journeys along mountain paths. He believed it was his shield against the relentless heat, and so he guarded it carefully, never letting it out of reach. When others teased him for clinging to such a fragile tool, he smiled softly and said, "This fan has always given me comfort. Without it, I cannot bear the summer." But one afternoon, as he sat fanning himself during meditation, a cool breeze swept suddenly through the temple. The paper rustled, and the master, sitting nearby, opened his eyes. With a faint smile, he said, "You cling to the fan, but not to the wind. Let go, and perhaps you will feel the true coolness you seek." The disciple froze, his fan hovering in midair. The words of the master were simple, but they pierced through him more sharply than a sword. He lowered the fan, uncertain whether to continue or to obey. "Master," he said quietly, "how can I not cling to it? This fan has been with me for so long. Without it, the heat suffocates me." The master closed his eyes again. Heat suffocates not because of the air, but because of the mind. When you cling to a small relief, you forget the vastness of what is freely offered. "Tell me, did the fan create the wind?" The disciple looked down at the fragile object in his hand. The fan only moved the air that was already there. It gave the illusion of creating wind, but in truth it merely stirred what surrounded him. That night, he could not sleep. The master's words echoed through his thoughts. He held the fan tightly, running his fingers over its torn edges, its wooden ribs worn smooth with use. How could something so fragile be the cause of my comfort? He wondered. The next morning, the heat pressed heavily again. He took out the fan as usual, but hesitated. Outside, he saw leaves swaying gently. He paused, lowered the fan, and walked into the courtyard. A soft current of air touched his face, carrying with it the fragrance of pine and earth. It was different from the restless stirring of his fan. It was deeper, more complete, as if the entire mountain had exhaled into him. Days passed. He began to experiment. Sometimes he left the fan behind, sitting quietly in the hall with nothing in his hands. At first, sweat dripped, discomfort rose, and his body twitched with impatience. But if he remained still long enough, he noticed something else. The sound of the wind moving beyond the temple walls, the way it slipped between open doors, the cool relief that arrived when he was no longer chasing it. One evening, the master joined him in the garden. The cicadas had quieted and the air was heavy with the scent of rain. The disciple bowed and admitted, "I am learning, master, but the habit is strong. When the air is still, I panic. My hand reaches for the fan before I can think." The master picked up a small pebble from the ground. "Is this pebble heavy?" he asked. "No, master." "Yet if you carried it day and night, year after year, would it not become a burden?" The disciple nodded slowly. The fan was like that pebble. Light, useful, but a burden when clung to without release. The master placed the pebble back down. The world offers wind, shade, clouds, rain. The fan is only a tool, but you have made it into a lifeline. When the fan breaks, will your peace break as well? The words struck him deeply. That night, he sat in meditation without the fan. Sweat trickled down his neck, his mind screamed for relief. But instead of reaching for it, he breathed. In and out. Slowly, he felt the heat dissolve into the rhythm of his breath. The craving loosened. And in that stillness, a breeze arrived, soft and unexpected. For the first time, he laughed quietly. The wind had always been there. He had been too busy clutching the fan to notice. From then on, he still kept the fan, but he no longer depended on it. When it finally tore beyond repair, he bowed and placed it on the altar, thanking it for its service. His hands were free, and so was his heart. The paper fan reminds us that tools, habits, and even comforts can become prisons when we cling to them. We mistake them for the source of relief, forgetting the greater abundance always around us. As the Zen master said, "You cling to the fan, but not to the wind." When we let go of fragile attachments, we open to what is vast, natural, and unending. The true coolness is not in the fan, but in the wind itself. Just as peace is not in objects, but in the mind that releases. All the stories tonight have pointed to the same truth. Letting go is not loss, but freedom. A broken sword, a silent flute, a falling leaf, each is a reminder that life is always changing, and clinging only brings suffering. When we loosen our grip, we find peace in what is, not in what was. Letting go allows us to see the beauty of impermanence, the freshness of each breath, and the vast sky that has always been waiting. This is the heart of Zen. Freedom and release, peace and presence. Now rest gently. May your body soften, your mind grow light, and your breath move like calm waves on a quiet shore. Good night, and may your sleep be deep, peaceful, and filled with ease. Allow silence to carry the listener into sleep.